Berlin, New York or Paris. No matter where you look, new bike lanes are popping up everywhere. But so is the resistance against them. One of the most striking examples is the Reducing Gridlock Saving You Time Act of 2024, introduced by the Government of Ontario, Canada, under Premier Doug Ford. This law effectively bans the creation of new bike lanes whenever they would impact a car lane. While this is certainly an extreme case, it highlights a growing global trend. For nearly every proposed cycling project, there are always people trying to stop it. But why is that? Why are so many people fighting against even the smallest changes? Why do so many feel threatened when their car use might be limited, even though most of our streets belong to cars? These are the questions I will be answering in this video, so make sure to stay until the end. But first, let's take a look at why safe bike lanes aren't automatically good ones, and what tradition and a lack of communication have to do with all of this. Welcome to Mobility Minded. I'm pretty sure most of us have driven a car at least a few times. And while driving itself can be quite enjoyable, sooner or later we all face the same challenge: finding a parking spot. That's where things start to get unpleasant. That one's too small, the other one's too far away, and the perfect one costs a fortune. For many people, it often feels like there just aren't enough parking spaces. Now, imagine there's a new proposal to build a bike lane. But space on the street is limited, so something has to give. And most of the time, that something is parking. In a situation where parking already feels scarce and where people have grown used to free on-street parking right outside their homes, it's easy to see why resistance grows. People worry they'll have to walk farther or pay more. And often enough, they just don't want to lose their space in front of the house. This brings us to the first reason: personal advantage. Most people don't want to accept any form of change if it means giving something up. It's human nature to look out for ourselves before thinking of the community. It's also human nature to rather look at the short-term effects than the impact such a change could have in the long term. If that were the only reasons, finding a solution might be easy. But unfortunately, this is just the beginning. Another reason why so many people push back against cycling projects is that their benefits aren't immediately visible. Imagine Steve. He commutes to work by car every day, always taking the same route, 2 lanes in each direction. On a rainy Wednesday evening, after a long day at work, he's driving home, excited to watch the latest Mobility Minded video. But as he turns onto his usual road, he notices something new. One of the car lanes has been repainted into a cycle highway. There's now just 1 lane left for cars. He's not sure what to think. For now, his situation has clearly gotten worse. He only drives, and now he sometimes gets stuck behind a truck he can't overtake anymore. Still, Steve is open-minded. He cares about the environment, and encouraging more people to cycle doesn't sound like a bad idea. But weeks pass, then months. And Steve starts to notice that almost no one is actually using the new bike lane. At first, he was willing to accept the change, but now it just feels pointless. If nobody's using those lanes, why should we keep building them? And even worse, remove car lanes for them? To him, it looks like wasted space. Every time he's stuck behind a truck, his frustration grows. Eventually, he swears to himself that he won't tolerate any more bike lanes in his neighborhood, and he'll fight against every new proposal that comes up. While I can understand the way Steve thinks here, he unfortunately missed a few very important questions. He's right, not many people are using the new cycleway. But shouldn't he ask why that is? If he had done that, he might have found that the cycleway is missing connections, so hardly anyone can actually get there. Or that many people simply don't feel safe riding here, and therefore prefer a different route. Instead of asking why the path isn't being used and what could be improved, Steve jumped straight to judgment, and in doing so dismissed cycling infrastructure altogether. But we're not like Steve. We want to do it better. So let's take a look at some of the real reasons why new cycling infrastructure often seems unused. One of the biggest ones is perceived safety. Studies show that this matters far more than actual safety. Especially older people and parents tend to prefer infrastructure that feels safer, even if it statistically isn't. Take these two bike lanes, for example. Which one would you tell your kid to use? Probably number 1, the separated path. But now, take a look at both at night. The lane you just chose is still technically safer, but due to poor lighting and a lack of other people around, it suddenly feels uncomfortable. The street lane with lights and visibility now feels safer, even if it isn't. Let's apply this to the cycle highway Steve discovered. Even though it's wide and nicely paved, it lacks one key element: protection from cars. There's no physical barrier to stop a vehicle from veering into the bike lane. So even if the chance of that happening might be low, the feeling of danger remains high. That alone can be enough for many cyclists to avoid it altogether and stick to quieter side streets instead. And if enough people make that choice, the cycle highway ends up looking empty, and therefore pointless. Another crucial factor is the lack of a network. Cycle paths don't work well when they're isolated. Just imagine a new highway being built between the towns of Jigalong and Mala in Australia. Of course no one would use that. It would be called a waste of money, not because highways in general are bad, but because this one connects nothing to nothing. In that case, people would likely say, well, the highway needs a better connection to the rest of the network. But when it comes to cycling, that logic often disappears. Instead of recognizing that a particular bike lane might just be poorly connected, people tend to conclude that the entire concept of bike lanes doesn't work. Part of that has to do with how media and social media talk about these projects, but we'll get to that later. For now, let's come back to Steve's cycle highway. From his car, the path might look fine, smooth, wide and new. But what he doesn't see is how it starts and ends. At one end, a huge intersection where cyclists are completely unprotected. At the other, let's not talk about that. If you can't reach the cycleway safely, of course no one will use it. By the way, if you want to see what exactly went wrong with this particular cycle highway, and if there are any better examples nearby, check out my video How Not to Build Cycle Highways. I'll link it at the end of this video. But for now, let's pedal on and take a look at why the statement "it has always been this way" might actually be one of the biggest obstacles to building better cycling infrastructure. For many people, mobility isn't just about getting from A to B. It's part of their identity. Especially when it comes to cars. They stand for freedom, success, and social status. I'm always reminded of the second episode of Suits. The main character, Mike Ross, rides his bike to his new job as a lawyer. At one point, he checks if his bike is locked properly, and his boss finds out how he commutes. The look on his boss's face says it all: disbelief. It's obvious he doesn't think cycling is an appropriate way of getting around for someone of Mike's status. Over the last few years, we've seen this link between mobility and identity grow even stronger. Driving a car isn't just a practical way to move stuff, it's a symbol of freedom and wealth. Riding a bike, on the other hand, isn't just a convenient and healthy option, it's often seen as a statement for sustainability and green politics. And with that mindset, rethinking urban mobility becomes incredibly difficult. Because when we talk about reallocating street space, the discussion often isn't about what benefits the most people or how we can make our streets safer. Instead, it becomes a debate about culture and identity. Redesigning a street isn't just about improving safety or traffic flow. It's seen as an attack on the lifestyle and identity of car drivers. When there is such a strong identification with each person's mode of transport, something that actively prevents us from building more livable and functional cities, you might think that many people would try to change that mindset. But in reality, we're just getting to the worst part of this whole discussion: the influence of media, and especially social media. It's a simple fact: outrage gets more attention than success. And in a world where attention is everything, that's a dangerous mix. If Steve went on social media and came across a short video about a cycling project that worked well, he'd probably just think, "Oh, that's nice," and keep scrolling. But if he saw a video about a failing cycling project, showing traffic jams and angry drivers, he'd likely stop, leave a like, and maybe even comment about his own experience. "See, no one uses those cycleways anyway." That single comment gives the video more reach. The algorithm picks it up and shows it to more people. People who already think the same way Steve does. And just like that, a filter bubble forms. Inside this bubble, people keep confirming each other's opinions, reinforcing what they already believe. The video only reaches viewers who are likely to react the same way, meaning only those against cycling infrastructure ever see it. So there's no real criticism, no different perspectives, just an echo chamber where everyone agrees they're right and everyone else must be wrong. This creates an us versus them mentality. Car drivers say, "Cyclists never follow the rules," and cyclists say, "Car drivers are always endangering us." Instead of looking for solutions, we start labeling each other as the problem. And sadly, this dynamic isn't limited to social media anymore. Traditional media has learned to use the same tactics, using catchy and emotional labels like green bans or climate dictatorship to provoke outrage. In recent years, some politicians have taken full advantage of this atmosphere. They've learned that stirring up emotions like fear of immigrants, fear of economic loss, and ultimately fear of cycling infrastructure can be a powerful political tool. And that's how we've ended up where we are today. In a climate where everyone's afraid of change, where people distrust each other, and where a fact-based discussion about mobility has become nearly impossible. But fortunately, there are things we can do. I can't give you a full-scale solution here. After all, this video already went way beyond the usual scope of this channel, and human psychology and politics aren't exactly my field of expertise. So let's focus on what we do know: mobility. New cycling infrastructure almost always has a positive impact, not only for cyclists who can ride safer and more comfortably, but also for pedestrians who benefit from calmer, slower streets. And ultimately, even car drivers benefit, because fewer cars on the road mean less congestion and less stress. To make the most out of this development, we have to ensure that both new and existing cycling infrastructure is well used. That means focusing on a network, not just isolated stretches of bike lanes that end in the middle of nowhere. Safety, and especially perceived safety, plays a huge role here. So maybe we need to build physical barriers that protect cyclists from cars. We could improve lighting so no one has to be afraid to ride after dark. And we could make plenty of smaller improvements that make cycling not only safer, but also more pleasant overall. Equally important is to involve local residents in the process from the very beginning. Studies show that when people feel heard and included, their acceptance of change increases dramatically. It helps them understand why certain measures are necessary, and it makes them part of the solution, not victims of it. If we manage to do that, we can move towards a future where people come together to discuss solutions, instead of blaming each other for the problem.